While overall audit outcomes improved in the 2019-2020 financial year, there was still irregular expenditure of over 50 billion rand within government institutions. Currently, irregular expenditure that has not been dealt with and has accumulated for years stands at over 200 billion rand. This is the latest from the Auditor General, Tsakani Maluleke, as outlined in her audit report released earlier today. Heidi Giokos has been following that story and joins us live to unpack the Auditor General's findings for us. Heidi, so although overall irregular expenditure has dropped, there are still some concerns around government departments not taking the advice of the Auditor General when it comes to cleaning up their books to curb irregular expenditure, which is still quite high.
Yes, certainly, Annelie, and I think what's key here is the fact that, of course, there has been some improvement with regards to various government departments having clean audits, but what's extremely concerning and alarming for the Auditor General is the fact that there has been no consequence or accountability for those responsible for there not being enough clean audits and the irregular expenditure that we are seeing. As you can see on your screen right now, we do know that irregular expenditure is down from 66 billion in 2019-2020 to 54 billion. But what the Auditor General is indicating here is that this is nothing to celebrate because a number of entities were unable to provide key information and documentation and were unable to get any kind of audits, which would of course reflect if there was any kind of irregular expenditure or any irregularities picked up in these entities. So even though there might be some kind of drop, the Auditor General highlighting that it cannot be attributed to the fact that there is less irregular spending, but rather at the fact that there is key documentation that is missing. Also, what the Auditor General is picking up is that these institutions and entities are very bad at reporting irregular expenditure and providing the necessary documentation for the Auditor General's office to provide these audits and to have a clean audit or to just have the necessary documentation to conduct this kind of audit. So even though there is some improvement in the audits and we're seeing cleaner audits, there is still some regression, and the fact that irregular expenditure remains a big concern. Over 50 billion is a large number. But let's listen to what the Auditor General said with regards to this.
The pace and diligence around investigations is not evident. The discipline that should be enforced is not happening, so there are no consequences. The recovery of funds is not happening. The condonation of things that can only happen once we are clear on what gave rise to that irregular expenditure, that's not happening. And the write-offs are not happening. And all of that indicates that we are continuing to have a culture where there is tolerance for lack of compliance.
The Auditor General also didn't pull any punches when she broke down the state of state-owned enterprises, what actually is happening in SOE's books, and will they survive?
Well, how do you audit a state-owned entity, Annelie, if you do not have their financial statements for the past 3 years? And this is the case for state-owned entity and national carrier SA. They have not submitted financial statements for the past 3 years, which makes it impossible for the Auditor General to conduct any kind of audit. And also SA Express, and given the fact that they are still under provisional liquidation, even though SAA is under business rescue, over the past 3 years they have not been submitting any financial statements. And of course this has been taken up with Parliament and SCOPA to look further and to make sure that there is some kind of accountability and consequence for this kind of conduct. But also we do know that the Auditor General highlighting that a number of state-owned entities, the biggest ones such as Eskom, PRASA, Denel, the SABC, unable to provide certainty in their financial statements, showing a very bleak picture of their current financial status and constantly reliance on government fiscus to basically survive and be solvent. So this is a very big concern for the Auditor General, saying that something needs to be done so that these SOEs can be functional and profitable and not constantly rely on government fiscus, which puts a huge strain, of course, on government's purse. But let's listen to the Auditor General once again on this matter.
A number of those had operated with a deficit for the year, had creditors being left unpaid for extended periods. A number of them even had adverse or disclaimer audit opinions, mainly because of not being able to apply the going concern assumption. Put simply, it's saying that as auditors, we were uncomfortable that those entities, without a guaranteed capital injection or a major shift in how they are operating, that they would be able to continue to operate into the foreseeable future.
Heidi, another big issue is that there's over 200 billion rand in cumulative losses that has yet to be recovered.
Yes, so in the last financial year, we have seen that the Auditor General has not been able to audit over 2 billion rand, and this is because there has not been enough documentation and information from these entities for any audit to be conducted. But what's concerning for the Auditor General is the fact that unresolved audits amount to about 262 million rand over the previous financial years that has still not been resolved or accounted for. For example, we do know that in this previous audit 2019-2020 financial year, we know that the Auditor General has picked up that, for example, the Department of Health in Limpopo province ordered machinery, radiology machinery, to the tune of about 2 million rand, and that machinery was not being used. So that money is sitting there, not being used and not being utilized by the Department of Health. So the Auditor General is in a very difficult position to say, so much money is being spent, but we cannot account for it. We are not seeing how it is being used or utilized, and they have specifically highlighted the Department of Health as well as the Department of Education to say that this is concerning, and the entities and ministers and those responsible in these entities need to take account and need to be aware of these red flags from the Auditor General, and also the fact that there is no accountability and how there is very poor control and awareness of how much money is being spent when it comes to irregular expenditure, when it comes to equipment and material use of the equipment, and it's just sitting there. So unfortunately, it's a very bleak picture for our national and provincial entities by the Auditor General. There's been some improvement, but the Auditor General is saying there needs to be accountability, and there needs to be an act of accountability within these entities and those that need to be held responsible.
Thank you very much, Heidi Giokos. We're going to leave it right there.